Welcome to Redefining Engagement. I'm Francesca Duma, Director of Audience Development and Strategy at Contribly. And in this show, I speak to leaders and innovators in the media industry so that we can bring tips, wisdom, ideas, and even some things to avoid so that we can all do more engagement better. So without further ado, let's move on to our next guest. Hello, JC. Thank you so much for joining me to talk a bit about engagement. Just to start off, would you mind introducing yourself and maybe telling me a bit about your career so far?
Yeah. So my name is Juan Carlos Lopez. Everybody calls me JC. It's always easier for non-Spanish-speaking people. So you can call me JC, as you did. My role is of Director of Data and AI at Schibsted Media. Before that, I had a first stint in Norway doing a lot of research, many different types of technologies. And then I went to Australia for 6 years, worked a lot with smart home, connected home, and then ventured into actually energy, batteries, solar panels, controls for batteries and so on. And then came back and just before the pandemic joined Schibsted Marketplaces and then Schibsted Media about 3 years ago. So it's my first time in media, but I really enjoy the industry. So very exciting times for us.
You're a world traveler and an industry traveler then, in a sense. Yes. And I'm guessing media is a very, very different world to a lot of the things that you've done. What do you think is the biggest difference? What's the challenge, or have you seen anything that has jumped out to you?
Yeah, exactly. Like I never realized, how important this journalistic mission is. I always tell this story because I really just opened my eyes. So the newspaper that we have called BG, they run a meeting every day almost at 10:45, where they get together all the journalists and the chief editor and everybody working there. And they go through the most important news of the week or the day, or any events happening at the moment. And then when you get to see the importance on why are we covering this, why should we balance the stories that we tell, we cannot go too much on one side or too much on the other, or we should not talk too much now because people are afraid. So actually this morning the message was, let's not use too heavy words on what the US is saying to Europe, because we don't want people to get too nervous. So let's just tone it down a bit, be very factual, provide the context. And I was like, wow, this is amazing. I never understood how important it is for democracy and for, the countries to have like true dedicated journalists trying to provide good information for everybody. So yeah, I think that is what inspires me the most, and it's the most exciting about media.
I can't agree more, because it was the same for me when we were at The Guardian, the meetings that they would have in the mornings, talking about like what angle, why are we doing this is so important. And it's so true that our readers, I don't think, are aware of these conversations happening and how important, how seriously everybody takes them as well.
Exactly. So, I was not aware of it, so I truly appreciate it now.
How does that relate from a data point of view? Is that part of the conversation as well, and how you approach it?
Yeah, so every newspaper is a bit different, but I can keep on that example. This morning, the chief editor does go through some of the key metrics for that newspaper, and things like traffic on mobile, comparison versus other outlets, spikes on events. Why did we have a lot of activity during Tuesday, but then we dropped? So they do a daily analysis of 3-4 key metrics.
Okay, and maybe we should go into the topic that we're here for as well. My first question to you really is, from your point of view, what is audience engagement? What does that mean to you?
Yeah, I mean, this is such a good question, because I think it has many angles, and that's partly why the challenge and how it creates many sort of discussions and problems within companies like ours. So for me, and I'm going to tell you what my personal sort of view of engagement is, and then I will give you more of the, how it is perceived in Schibsted Media. But for me, engagement should be a measure of how valuable we are for our readers or our audience. It should be an indicator of, do they actually value the service that we provide? And if engagement is high, that should be a direct, answer for that. I think that also helps measure, for example, what we just discussed about, are we achieving our journalistic mission? Are we informing how we want to inform? And in my opinion, this is how we should treat engagement, right? If important things are happening and we measure this in a positive way, then we are doing a good job in terms of delivering information, truthful information on time and so on. So like that's for me what it should be like, but there's many other sort of views and I can go a bit into that if you want.
Yes, please, please.
So I think, a lot of the discussions, even between or within, our news desks, I think come from what social media has done to us, and also other things like YouTube or services like YouTube and other services like that, because for them it has been a lot about how much time do you spend on the site, right? It's like, do you see, X amount of minutes of videos, or, do you scroll, X amount of times, and then the algorithms are tuned to keep you glued on the screen almost regardless of what they showed you, right? And this is where it gets a bit sort of ugly, and this is where many of the newspapers don't agree, because they don't want engagement for any possible reason. They want, they want people to be informed. They don't want them just to be hooked into the screen, watching videos or reading things that maybe don't matter. So a lot of the discussion comes from that. And then, the second part of it is, how do you actually measure engagement? And it's really hard, right? So this is where also we in Schibsted run into trouble, because we are many different brands, and some newspapers, for example, rely on ads and they have daily traffic, while other brands are more of a pure subscription brands, and they they rely on subscription revenues. So the incentives sometimes are a bit different, and one newspaper will measure engagement a bit different than the other. That's, I guess, maybe a particular problem for Schibsted, not for everybody, but it's something that is, it's something that we're trying to solve, and it's one of the key problems that we have.
I find it's interesting that I'm hearing we are making ourselves similar to social media because we're fighting for attention, whereas the core mission is information and providing value. And we're still potentially measuring it so much more like social media as well, depending on ads or subscriptions. When you mention ads, I'm guessing time on page, major focus. Whereas when we're talking about subscriptions, it's potentially more churn and increasing subscriptions. There's so much nuance to that, though, isn't there?
Yep. Exactly.
Is that something that you've been playing with?
Yeah, absolutely. So actually, in one of our key metrics for this year, it was discussed something like number of engaged subscribers. So that was one thing that we wanted to measure. And then, it feels almost a bit random, but the definition at some point was like, okay, an engaged subscriber is one that either sees 20% of an article, or watches more than 2 minutes of a video, or spends, let's say 5 minutes on a site. So it feels like, okay, we just selected, some limits or on the metric that we think should, indicate that people are happy with the content that we provide. But it's for me, it sounded a bit too random, right? It's like, why why 20%? Why not 30? How do we know that that's an engaged subscriber versus not an engaged subscriber? So we are actually running into these sort of challenges. So we're trying to measure engagement in a slightly different way.
Can you share more? How are you doing it? Tell me more.
Yeah, and also one thing that I wanted to talk to you about is that one way or one reason why we want to measure engagement is because we said, okay, we have ads, services that rely on ads, and also services that rely on subscription, and obviously it's really important for us to have our subscribers engaged, right? Because that's also a way of measuring not only if they are happy with the news, but if how do we know that what they are paying us for the subscription is worth their money, right? So then by keeping them engaged and measuring if they are actually engaging with the service they are paying for, we believe that also that means that, okay, they are most probably going to continue to pay for the service because they are engaging with it sufficiently so that it indicates they are happy. So that's another angle of engagement that we have. And then the current definition that I think it's a good one, and not for other reason, but because it gathers, I think, both use cases. So the ad serving, the subscription, plus the fact that we don't actually need to measure how long they spent on the site or how much of an article they read. So it's generic enough, but sort of informative enough. And the definition is how, like, out of 7 days a week, how many days of the week do they visit us? So, obviously the highest will be 7 days a week. And we have some newspaper that have a high percentage, almost 50% of the user base comes back every day.
Wow, that is a high number. Fantastic.
Exactly. Once you see the curves, it's very interesting because then we have newspapers that it's almost the opposite, right? You can see that users come 1 day a week, and that's the highest percentage. And then it starts to go down, like people that come 2 days a week, and the graph goes almost the other way around, right? So it goes like this, and it's almost nobody that comes back 7 days a week. And then that informs you, okay, what's happening? This newspaper has content, but then people are satisfied after 1 day of the week, and they don't come back, right? So, why is that? We also have some, and then, for example, just to continue on that, the part of the reason for that is that they get a lot of traffic from, let's say, VG. So they refer articles to this other newspaper. So, people are in VG, they see a link to an article, they want to read more, they go and read, they finish reading, but they don't stay, right? They just read that article that was referred, but they don't get engaged enough to go back directly to that site and continue reading the day after, unless they are pushed.
Interesting. What are the big differences between these news brands? What kind of content is getting people to stay, and what kind of content is getting them onto that brand and back away again?
Yeah, so for us, VG and Aftonbladet are definitely the two brands, VG in Norway and Aftonbladet in Sweden, that have the highest daily traffic. And it would be straightforward to say that the main reason is because they do breaking news, right? So our audience, to be updated with what's happening on a daily basis, that's where we want them to go, right? So it's, you want to know about the weather or what happened today and what's in sport. So that's where you get the latest information that you need to know. While some of the other newspapers go deeper, they explain things. It doesn't, they do get some important information for the day, but they provide a lot more context. It's deeper journalism. So those are some of the differences.
And what do you think the biggest hurdles are or challenges in your experience? Like, what is stopping news brands from engaging better?
So I think our biggest challenge, and maybe it's representative of the whole industry, is that we're not engaging the young audience almost anymore. So, the younger demographics are actually in social media, right? They spend a lot of the time there. Their algorithms are good, and they value the entertainment or content that they get there. So we are really good at engaging a certain audience, but obviously that audience is, at some point will leave us, and we need to, bring the younger people and inform them. It's just as important to inform them as well of what's going on and the important things, but we're not being attractive enough for them. So we are working really hard to understand how do they prefer to be engaging with us.
When you say young, what do you mean? Because everybody has a new definition of what young means.
Yeah, I think for us it's 15 to 25.
Okay.
Yeah.
Younger than a lot of the other news brands that the definition's young.
Yeah.
I'm old.
I don't even want to see where I land on that.
And why do you think we're not engaging with them as well as we could?
We know there are certain we know there are certain things, right? So we can see from the data that they don't read as much. When we are providing video content is a lot better. Our indication so far is that we need to change the format of how we deliver news, right? So obviously we went from paper, then we went digital, but now being digital is not enough. Being digital and just have a picture and some text is not engaging enough for the youth, right? So it needs to be interactive. It needs to be, if it has video or audio, or, you can engage with it in different ways. That's what they expect from a service like ours. So we really need to reinvent how we deliver the news.
So format is the biggest piece.
Format is super important, yes.
Okay. And maybe we can talk a little bit about strategies. What strategies have proven most effective in engaging audiences in your experience?
Yeah. Well, let me see if it's okay. Let me try to answer this differently. Perhaps the strategy is that we test things relatively quickly.
Mm-hmm.
And we try to have a culture of, test it, don't make hypotheses, or make your hypothesis, but then test it as quickly as possible, and then, see what happens, right? So I think maybe that is the key strategy. So to experiment as quickly as possible and to gather feedback. But for example, things like that we know are engaging this segment, and actually it expands to other segments, is we have a very similar game to the Wordle from the New York Times. Is something that we invented in one of our newspapers. And people love this, right? So people love to come back because every day is different. Every day is a bit of fun. It's a bit of a challenge. And then that allows us to sort of bring them back and have them engage with us. So that sort of game activity has proven to be really good. We also have both a huge success and a bit of a challenge, because we have some really good TV programs or series that we have launched in seasons. But the challenge that we have is that there comes a new season, it comes out, we get massive traffic, it finishes and people leave. So it's very engaging while it's there, but we don't have enough of that to keep them. And so it's both good and bad, right? So we're working on obviously retaining them, because we're doing such a good job bringing them, but we unfortunately lose them once this type of content is out.
People are used to binge watching. They do it all in one go, and then they're like, okay, that's enough. Thank you very much.
Exactly. And then another example of the type of things that we want to do more, and it shows my first sort of definition of value, is that when we went through the pandemic, I think a couple of our newspapers had these really nice data-driven statistics of everything related to the pandemic. And people see, and and we put it at the top front of the news destinations, and we got so much good feedback on, I just go in there to see, the stats and how are we doing, because it was so important for them, but it was delivered the right way. It was informative, it was engaging, the graphs were really nice. So we know that when we do hit this sort of sweet spot of good, valuable information in the right format, people engage. So we are always trying to find what that is.
I always think of a lot of our audiences, a bit like when you started and you said, the thing that surprised me the most about the news is how much thought goes into it. And I always think our audience they don't know the difference between social media and the news. Some of them see them as pretty much the same thing. And I have this feeling that a lot of the things that you've just mentioned that work are actually the differentiators from social media. It's really the things that stand out that you can't do on social, that you can do somewhere else, that is pulling these people and getting them to engage. More of a comment than anything else.
No, that's true. That's true. And I think that has been a discussion in the newsrooms. So we have stayed away from these self-generated content from our audiences, for good and bad. But that's obviously a key difference between social media, right? So in a way, the self-generated content is very engaging for everybody, and all the things people upload. But at the same time, we have this responsibility of providing truthful information that has been checked and its balance and all these things that we also talked about. So it's hard to keep those two things, right? So, how to make it very engaging, how to make people participate, but at the same time being very informative and cautious about it.
I think that's a really interesting point, because I guess the difference with social media is when people send in content, it's just a stream of other people's content. And yes, that's engaging because people want to see what their peers are doing. They don't necessarily want to be talked at. So really it is about what you said right at the beginning. It's about formats. If we do go down the route of getting people to engage with us, how do we make what they're sharing valuable, that is balanced? And that piece, that nuance between the two, is such an important piece as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know there are some attempts of doing that the right way, which is, I think, a good way of thinking about it. How can we make people into journalists and, allow them to also share potentially, good quality content with us and have other people engaged. So I think it's one of the things that we are, checking and seeing if it works, but it's harder to do than.
Definitely.
Yes.
So how do you get audiences to interact directly with the editorial team at the moment? Is it something that you play around with, or is it very much avoiding it?
I actually had this, I asked this question recently. None of our newspapers has been traditionally good at this, right? So we do have comment sections, but most of the comments are not really, they are not really like a dialogue, or they are not engaging in terms of, okay, let's discuss this topic, let's dive deeper, and then we have the journalist answering questions or things like that. It's been a bit more of either people being happy and say, hey, this was great, thank you for the article, or the opposite, I hate this, or some sort of trolling comment. So we haven't been able to sort of make it a good dialogue. But something that we're experimenting now with is with AI. It's making our content more interactive through AI.
Okay.
Not necessarily, having journalists expanding, allowing the technology to help people explore the content differently.
And then you're analyzing how they're exploring it so that you can then feedback to the editorial team as to how to do it better. Is that the cycle that you're creating?
Yeah. So for example, there's two things that are proving to be interesting. I guess the there's an experiment that we're running right now that depending on your personal preferences, if let's say I go back to the newspaper after 2 days or maybe even hours, it will say, hey, JC, since the last time you visited us, this is what has happened, right? So, based on, if I like sports or politics or what I tend to read, it will just give me a summary of what those things are. And then people sort of appreciate that, both because it's personalized and it's because it's sort of straight to the point. But then the experiment is we first left a chat open so that they could write their own sort of questions around the articles or the summaries that we presented. And I think almost nobody wrote anything. So the idea we thought is like, oh, people are going to write and they are going to go deeper and they are going to ask questions about the articles. Almost nobody sort of went and interacted like that.
Interesting.
Very interesting. But
did you give examples to like types of questions that they might ask, or was it very much an open box, like ask your question?
Well, that's the thing, right? So you exactly hit the nail there. So we first didn't have anything, just the chat, and just say like, hey, ask any question. But then we created these predefined prompts about, I think we started with the election campaign, or the EU elections. And once we provide these predefined prompts, then everybody clicks on those, right? And then after the text comes back with whatever the question was, or the going deeper was, then we keep populating it so that it goes deeper or a bit sideways, and then people really engage with that. So it's not that they are writing, but they really sort of, once they see the question, they're like, yeah, actually, why is that, right? Or when did this happen? And then they click on it, and then the story comes. So this is a good way that we're finding of people engaging with our content, not directly with a journalist, but with their content.
And did people end up asking questions eventually from seeing the prompts? Like, did any questions increase, or was it very much like actually they liked viewing the story from a question answer point of view?
Yeah, so the chat possibility is still there, but it's still maybe it's an educational thing, right? That once people understand how to use it, they will start writing more. But at the moment, it's mostly through the prompts that people interact with the content.
That's really interesting. So I've mentioned before, but I will mention it. I used to be a secondary school teacher, and that's literally what you do in a classroom, because it's about giving enough inspiration that someone feels like they can go further as well. Like if I gave everybody a white piece of paper and I said, draw something, well, a lot of people would just sit there going, what am I going to draw? And they'll spend a chunk of their time just thinking of that. Whereas if you give a piece of paper and you say, hey, draw a house, people start straight away. And then you pick one up and say, oh my God, I love the roof on the house. Oh, look, this person's got a chimney. Most people go, oh yeah, I could do a chimney. Oh, and I could also do a gate and a garden. And so those little steps increase quality so much. But it's such a nuanced thing, isn't it, when we look at like our audiences and what they're doing?
Exactly. And I think it's too daunting to have this sort of open text, but definitely, helping them with. And also for us is maybe this is where we should also go, and where our value is to ask the right questions, right? Maybe this is where we become extremely good at. It's like, okay, once you read this, what is the best question that we can ask about it, right? And then put it there, right? So then I think we can help and explore more on that. And yeah, this is what we're doing at the moment.
That's such a cool test. It's the kind of thing that I get very excited about. So this is great.
Exactly.
So, but how much of this information is the editorial team then getting? Are they using this to change how they're writing their content, or is it still the beginning of the process? So it's learning the reader's reactions first before it then feeds back to editorial?
Yeah, I think we're right in the beginning of it. So at the moment, what we're doing is just taking the the existing content as is, and sometimes make it available, like I said, just by saying this is what you missed. But we want to also provide it as a sort of a constant feature that it's always there in the newspaper, that you can just open up and maybe select some topics and ask questions. But we're really in the experimenting phase, sort of opening up just to a percentage of our audience and learning how they interact with it. So where it takes us, we believe it will, going back to why we're talking, you and me today, we believe that this will help us drive more engagement, right? And not in a bad way, but in an informative way, right? So especially with pre-created prompts, because then it is the questions that should be asked, right? It's like, why is this political party doing this, or why is Trump saying this, right? That is a very, very good way to engage, and this is what we want to measure. Are people coming back? What are they asking? All these things.
I love that. Engagement in an informative way. That's like one of the lines that I'm taking out of this already. And at what point in the process, because obviously you're a different team, so everybody's approaching it in a different way. From your experience, at what point in the process are you considering audience engagement? How does that take shape from a day-to-day point of view?
So part of the reshaping of Schibsted Media after we split from our marketplace's sister company, it was coming up with very clear metrics. We are looking into sessions with login, for example. We want more people to log into our services. We are also doing the typical monthly to daily ratios of activity. But one of the metrics is this measure of engagement, right? So, and in the way that I mentioned to you. So how many times during a week do people come back? So, to answer your question, we want this to be one of the 4 key metrics for the whole company that they need to be looking into, hopefully every day, right? So following, how is their newspaper doing compared to other newspapers within the Schibsted family, and trying to move the sort of groups. If you can visualize the graph of, usually like a typical graph for VG would be like, maybe let's say 20% come every 1 day a week. And then it goes down to, let's say, I don't know, 5% two times a week, 8% 3 times. So it's high, then low, and then goes up again, and really high.
Okay.
At the end, right, for the Aftonbladet and VG. So then for them is to see, okay, how much of those dailies or those that come just 2 can I push towards the right? So this is how we want to everybody in the company to think. You have people coming, but we want to push all those people to go a bit to the right, go from 2 days to 3 days, or from 3 days to 4 days, and then keeping them engaged as much as possible depending on the content.
So it's all about habit building. Like everything that you're doing is really focusing on, like, how do we get our readers to have a habit of coming to us?
Exactly. I think the key here, and this is why I made a sort of a point on this at the start of our conversation, is that I'm not talking about should it be video, or should it be a podcast, or should it be scrolling down. It doesn't really matter. What we want them is to engage with us frequently in whatever way. It might be 1 day is a podcast, the other day is a video, the third day is a game. It doesn't really matter the mix, but then the brands are free to do whatever combination of those things. And you don't have to be glued by the screen 5 hours a day either. It's more about, okay, we provide you a service. We believe that it's good for you to be informed on a daily basis. And then depending on how you interact with us, sometimes it can be a little, sometimes it can be a lot, but we believe that you should be informed daily on what's happening in the world.
That makes it so difficult for your editorial teams, because they have 100 ways that they could be communicating. And then they have to then go and create all of these different formats. And it could be different for everybody. Everyone might be approaching it in a different way. That's a lot.
Yeah.
But fair enough. Go on, sorry.
Yeah. But the brands are very different, right? So some brands are very strong on the podcasts, on the audio side of things. Some brands are on the breaking news. Some brands really go deep on the news. So yeah, I mean, we believe instead of being difficult, we give them freedom to choose what works for them, and make it a habit, just like you said.
Yeah. And what role does like technology and AI and data analytics play in this audience engagement? So is it obviously tech? We're talking about AI all the time. That is a massive focus for you. How does that look from an editorial point of view? How are you supporting them with tech?
Well, I think the most important thing for us is, or has been, and I mean it still is, to being able to standardize these definitions across all brands. I mean, you just mentioned it right now. It's like, oh, that's really difficult because they are all different, right? So then getting them in agreement into a metric that can apply for everybody has been difficult, which is why we fell into this one. And our role as tech is to, almost like we do with our audience, make that data easily available. So it's not like hidden behind, passwords and VPNs and things like that. We want it to be very quick and easy to access. And we spend a lot of time making it accurate. And so we use a lot of technologies into these two things. And then now, again, just like we do with our audience, now there's a lot of cool things you can do with visualizations of this data. So then, making it a bit exciting, right? It's like having a movement, having colors. And, now we also offer chats for analyzing data, right? So make also the data interactive for our internal teams. That's how we're using the technology to actually have the teams and the managers engage with the data, because otherwise it just sits there in a report that nobody uses.
So you're trying to create habits in your journalists to also engage with the data as much as they engage with their content.
Exactly.
I love that. What are the biggest challenges at the moment with that? Now that once you've made it beautiful, how are you getting your journalists to engage with it on a daily basis?
Yeah, I mean, it's I think we're not fully there. So many of the things that I mentioned is ambitious, or our ambitions. So, the first is that I think we now have agreements. The second now is that we do have the data, but it's not as easily accessible as we would like. So we are working on in a safe way to make it accessible, right? So we need to balance those two things. And then now with AI, like you say, we have some also experiments and some internal services where you can ask questions to the data, but we want to make it, again, accessible for everybody, super easy. So we have like components that we know are working well, but now we need to put it all together so that just like we do with our readers, right? Any journalist, any manager, anybody engages with it. But we're not there. And then, some people access the data, some people don't, some people know where it is, and some people don't. So we're working on it.
It's a fun challenge. It's a great challenge.
Absolutely.
And have you had any experience of engagement that surprised you in the past, maybe? Reader engagement or editorial engagement at this point, because I feel like we're talking about both.
Yeah, exactly. Let me think. I think the biggest change that we've seen now is the ability to talk to the data. So it surprised us because obviously it happened very quickly. And then once we did our first experiment, we got so many queries about it. So just to be concrete about it, we use Slack internally for all our internal communications. And then we thought, okay, let's just do an experiment. We put a couple of reports available through Slack where you can, write your questions and use AI to provide you with data or graphs on those. And we opened it up on a public channel, but we didn't advertise it that much. And then we just got so many people interacting with it. And, it became such a big service that we were not expecting, because people want to interact with our data. But until then, it was both difficult to find and, difficult to access. So, yeah.
So internally, you weren't advertising it. You didn't mention it. People just found it and went, I want to know X.
Yep.
How
it was
fun.
like a word of mouth thing, right? It's like people were saying, hey, have you used this service? We called it HAL 9000 from the movie. And then we got so many requests that we had to, obviously increase the capacity and the support and all those things. So it became super used very quickly.
What kind of questions were your journalists asking from the data?
Things like demographics, for example, like, what were the, top 10 articles that were mostly read by users between 15 to 25, for example. Mm-hmm. That, like, a lot of questions about the youth, and what topics are they reading? What are the articles that had the most hits? Those are examples of highly asked questions.
So you must have done a massive foundational piece when it came to like data within Schibsted to get to a point where you can even consider creating these dashboards or these questions. Like, that's a huge project. How was it easy to sell into everyone that this is something that needed to be done? Or was it just second nature? Like, everyone's talking about data now, we should be doing this. How long has it taken you? Sorry, lots of questions in one.
I think the difficult part that you mentioned is, having all that data available and in the right format to be able to launch these sort of things. So, I can imagine that, for this to work, you have to have, obviously, all the articles available, right? Then you have to have, columns with the right descriptive name so that, a chat can understand what that column is about, right? So it is a result of a lot of work that we've been doing through years, basically. But luckily, it didn't take us that long to put it all together, because the strategy for Schibsted for a while has been to basically be good at this data.
Well, at least the people at the top are making the right decisions to focus on data, if that is the case. I know we haven't got much time, but a big question for you that hopefully isn't too scary. And it's, where do you see the future of audience engagement heading in the next 3, 5, I'm not going to say 10 because that's a lot, but 3 to 5 years?
Yeah, I have this sort of crazy, well, maybe it's not that crazy, but it does create a lot of debates internally, because I don't think we as media are necessarily, and I said necessarily because it might be that we do, but I have my doubts, that we are going to win the interface battle, right? So I believe that there's so many technologies and new companies and startups that are so good at the format side of things, right? On video and audio and these things, and it moves so quickly. And this is, I guess, learning from other industries that I've worked in the past, that I believe that we are good at creating the core element of content, which is an article, right? Mm-hmm. The information within the article, that's what we're good, because we have journalists and we have photographers that go there and report and see it, and they have the information. I think we're going to be good at that, but I don't think necessarily that we will be the best at how to present that. So I think the roles for us as publishers will change, and the future will be that, we still create the content, but then the presentation can be in so many different ways that we don't even control ourselves.
Interesting. Okay. So we're almost going to outsource our content to companies that do a much better job at doing something with it. Or
yep,
okay.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's a very different answer to what I've had so far. So that's great. One last question for you. What would you say is one engagement hack that you would give to somebody starting out on their engagement journey? Maybe it's a new hyperlocal brand. Maybe it's a bigger brand who are rethinking it. What do you think they should be focusing on?
I mean, it's a bit of a boring answer, but it is so basic that you just need to understand what question do you want to answer with engagement, right? So, what is it that you're trying to achieve? For us, it was, as you rightly mentioned, it was this habit, right? We want to create a habit of coming back. But that answer might be very different for other younger brands. So, what is it that you want to answer? Define that really well, get agreement across everybody so that everybody understands also what to do to affect this metric. And I think it sounds, simple, but that is the absolute hardest part. Like solving the text, solving the tagging, that is easy. Just getting the agreement on the definition and getting the agreement on both management and lower levels of, okay, I understand what this is, I believe in it, and I'm supportive of it. I think that is the best thing.
I love that. Agreement.
Yeah.
So true. It's a little bit why we create this podcast, is to get all of these definitions together so that we can find out which ones make most sense. So
exactly.
I love that one. Well, thank you so much, Juan Carlos or JC, for your time. This was fantastic. I really enjoyed it, and I hope everyone else will.
Yes, thank you for having me, and talk to you soon.